لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وخاتم النبيين محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وسلم تسليما. As I was saying earlier on, I've been requested to begin the books of Hadith and also speak briefly about Suluk, Ihsan, Tazkiyah, Tasawwuf and the Bay'ah, and also relate the famous hadith known as Al-Hadith Al-Musalsal Bil-Awwaliyah, the hadith which is chained and linked by way of primacy, meaning it's the first hadith which ulama normally relate to their students and sometimes to audiences and congregations. So let me begin with the Al-Hadith Al-Musalsal Bil-Awwaliyah, and then I'll start the books of Hadith, and then inshallah following that I'll say a few words about Tasawwuf, Suluk, Tazkiyah, Ihsan, however you want to term it, and the Bay'ah. So the first hadith which ulama often relate to their students and audiences is the famous hadith of Rahmah, and it's related by many authors including Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal in his Musnad, Imam Abu Dawood in his Sunan, and Imam Tirmidhi rahmatullahi alayhi in his Sunan. And the wording of this hadith is from the narration of Imam Tirmidhi, بالسند المتصل مني إلى الإمام الترمذي رحمه الله قال, I, just earlier on, Maulana Muhammad Ali Sahib was asking me about what I had studied, and we were discussing, he was asking about a particular book, and then I was mentioning to him that with Hazrat Maulana Yusuf Sahib rahmatullahi alayhi, we actually studied Tirmidhi. So this was the first hadith which Hazrat also related to us, and it's from the narration of Tirmidhi rahmatullahi alayhi. So وبالسند المتصل مني إلى الإمام الترمذي رحمه الله قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الراحمون يرحمهم الرحمن يرحموا من في الأرض يرحمكم من في السماء. الراحمون, the merciful ones, يرحمهم الرحمن, the most gracious one is merciful to them. Irhamu man fil ard, be merciful to those who are on earth. Yarhamkum man fis sama, he who is in the heaven will be merciful to you. So that's the first hadith, al-Hadith al-Musalsal bil-Awwaliyah. Let's now start some of the kitabs of hadith. So we'll begin with Nasai. Maulana Muhammad Ali just asked me which book shall we do first, so I said we'll go backwards. I will begin with the later works. So Imam Nasai rahmatullahi alayhi passed away in 303 Hijri. So of the 6 authors of hadith, he was the last one to pass away. So we'll do his kitab first. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وبالسند المتصل مني إلى الإمام النسائي رحمه الله قال. So open Sunan al-Nasa'i. I'll give you a few moments. Just let someone know as soon as you've opened Nasa'i. And then after Nasa'i we'll do Tirmidhi, and then Abu Dawood, and then Ibn Majah, and then Muslim. And we should be doing Bukhari after that, because I'll do some kalam on Bukhari. We'll do the Muwatta of Imam Malik rahimahullah, with the riwayah of Imam Muhammad, Imam Yahya, and then the riwayah of Imam Muhammad. If you've opened up النسائي بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبالسند المتصل مني إلى الإمام النسائي رحمه الله قال تأويل قوله عز وجل. So depending on the nuskha that you have, there may be some sanad at the beginning, meaning the sanad of the kitab, not the sanad of the hadith, or some other kalam. So look for the words تأويل قوله عز وجل إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق. وبه قال أخبرنا قتيبة بن سعيد قال حدثنا سفيان عن الزهري عن أبي سلمة عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إذا استيقظ أحدكم من نومه فلا يغمس يده في وضوئه حتى يغسلها ثلاثا فإن أحدكم لا يدري أين باتت يده. That's the first hadith of Nasa'i. And I won't do kalam on all of the kitabs, but as you can see, this is about tahara, and it's a commentary of the verse of the Holy Quran about wudu. إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق. And the first hadith is a basic etiquette and adab that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam has taught us, to wash our hands, or the literal translation of the hadith is Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, when one of you wakes up from his sleep, then let him not immerse his hand in his water of wudu until he washes the hand thrice. فَإِنَّ أَحَدَكُمْ لَا يَدْرِي أَيْنَ بَاتَتْ يَدُهُ. One of you does not know where his hand has passed in the night. So it's a basic adab. Of course, this is to ensure that the water of tahara is not polluted. But at the same time, it also shows us a very basic etiquette and adab, which is that one has no control over one's bodily organs during sleep, and it's quite possible that the hand may become contaminated during the night. And not just in a ritual sense, but in a physical, practical sense. I've always thought about this hadith, that it's so relevant even today, in the sense that this hadith teaches us, of course it's not to do with that, but the adab that we learn from this hadith teaches us that when you wake up, the first thing you shouldn't do is touch your phone. And this is something I practice, in the sense that upon waking up, I touch nothing until I have thoroughly cleansed myself. So it's a basic adab. Let's do the next kitab. Tirmidhi. Imam Tirmidhi rahmatullahi alayhi passed away in 279 Hijri, and that's why we're doing the kitab next. So open up Tirmidhi, and depending on the nuskha there'll be a lot of kalam, so just find the words Abwab al-Tahara. Is everyone ready? بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبالسند المتصل مني إلى الإمام الترمذي رحمه الله قال أبواب الطهارة عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم باب ما جاء لا تقبل صلاة بغير طهور وبه قال حدثنا قتيبة بن سعيد قال أخبرنا أبو عوانة عن سماك بن حرب قال وحدثنا هناد قال حدثنا وكيع عن إسرائيل عن سماك عن مصعب بن سعد عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا تقبل صلاة بغير طهور ولا صدقة من غلول قال هناد في حديثه إلا بطهور. قال أبو عيسى هذا الحديث، أبو عيسى أي الترمذي، قال أبو عيسى هذا الحديث أصح شيء في هذا الباب وأحسن. وفي الباب عن أبي المليح عن أبيه وأبي هريرة وأنس وأبو المليح بن أسامة اسمه عامر ويقال زيد بن أسامة بن عمير الهذلي. This is the first hadith and bab of Imam Tirmidhi rahmatullahi alayhi sunan. And again, as you can see, it's to do with Tahara, bab al-Taharati an Rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And the hadith is that لا تقبل صلاة بغير طهور ولا صدقة من غلول. No prayer is accepted without purity, i.e. ritual purity. And no sadaqah, no charity is accepted from pilfered wealth, meaning stolen wealth, wealth obtained through deception. Simple meaning: our salah must be based on proper purity. Our sadaqah, charity, must be based on halal wealth. Neither will be accepted by Allah. All good deeds, in order to be accepted by Allah, must follow their conditions, must fulfill their prerequisites. And we have to adopt a comprehensive approach to our religion, in the sense that we can't just think in a very deluded manner that I will do any good deed and it will be accepted by Allah. And unfortunately, we do have that attitude, where we look at good deeds in isolation. And we think that this one good deed will solve things for me. And this is a perfect example. Some people may even, in their delusion, give charity from inappropriate wealth, misappropriated wealth, stolen wealth. and wealth not just stolen, but taken through deception. That's just one example. One can't think that this is sadaqah, it will be accepted by Allah. This is salah, it will be accepted by Allah. This is my hajj, it will be accepted by Allah. And that these good deeds will be sufficient to wipe away one's sins, as people often believe about hajj. That hajj, when a person goes to hajj, hajj cleanses everything, wipes away everything, sheds everything, purifies a person. And, as is mentioned in the hadith, a person returns from hajj like the day his mother first gave birth to him, like a newborn child. And people take this hadith and its interpretation to the extreme. So much so that some people actually believe wholeheartedly that no matter what they've done, especially to others, hajj will clear away everything. And the ulama agree that all of the ahadith would speak about virtuous deeds, of sins being shed, whether it's to do with salah, whether it's to do with Ramadan, whether it's to do with Jum'ah. That's that famous hadith in which Prophet ﷺ says, Ramadan to Ramadan, Salah to Salah, and they, Ramadan to Ramadan, Salah to Salah, will shed all of the sins in between. Even Umrah, even Hajj, even Salah, even Siyam, fasting, even Ramadan, even Sadaqah. All of these ahadith. In fact, I related one only yesterday in the dars. Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, both relate from Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, من قال سبحان الله وبحمده في يوم 100 مرة حطت خطاياه وإن كانت مثل زبد البحر. Whoever says Subhanallah wa bihamdih 100 times in one day, all of his sins will be shed, even though they may be, i.e. the sins may be equivalent to the foam of the sea. So when I related that hadith, I explained then as well that this is, remember, this is only for minor sins, one, and number two, only for those sins whose relation is only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, between a person and Allah. This hadith and all of the other ahadith would speak about the shedding of sins and the forgiveness of sins. Do not relate to major sins, one, and number two, any sins that are connected to the creation. One cannot wipe away one's misdeeds towards the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until a person makes direct amends and seeks forgiveness from that person and makes halal what they have made haram between them. So, going back to the hadith, no salah is accepted. So, no salah is accepted without tuhur, purity, and no sadaqah is accepted with ghulu, meaning wealth obtained by theft or deception. So, we have to adopt a comprehensive approach. Deeds are connected, and salah cannot be taken in isolation, sadaqah cannot be taken in isolation. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تُبْطِلُوا صَدَقَاتِكُمْ بِالْمَنِّ وَالْأَذَى كَالَّذِي يُنْفِقُ مَالَهُ رِئَاءَ النَّاسِ وَلَا يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ إلى آخر الآية. That, O believers, do not destroy and render null and void your sadaqat, your charity, Through what? بالمن والأذى. Through boasting, one, and through inconvenience and hurt. Like one who spends his wealth merely to show people, and he does not believe in Allah and in the final day, till the end of the verse. So later in the verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains, فَمَثَلُهُ كَمَثَلِ صَفْوَانٍ عَلَيْهِ تُرَابٌ فَأَصَابَهُ وَابِلٌ فَتَرَكَهُ صَلْدًا لَا يَقْدِرُونَ عَلَى شَيْءٍ مِّمَّا كَسَبُوا. That someone who spends his wealth insincerely, or who destroys his wealth through man and other, i.e. boasting and hurt, then his example is like that of a bald, shiny rock, Safwan. On that smooth rock is turab, soil, dust. When all of a sudden heavy rain falls and it leaves the rock bare because it washes away all the dust, the soil, they will have no access or control over what they have earned. So I'll just paraphrase or explain very quickly. What this refers to is that what this means, if someone gives sadaqah, and he gave that sadaqah 10 years ago, 10 years, and even 10, 15, even 20 years later, the person boasts of that sadaqah, that I did this. Or the person uses that sadaqah as leverage to try and win influence. So he gave £1,000, and now he wants something back, even indirectly, for that £1,000 donation or help. So he reminds a person, remember, I did this for you. That's boasting, that's mun. And other, actually putting them in a difficult position, inconveniencing them, hurting them, using their donation and their charity as leverage. Even 10, 15 years ago, that's mun and other. If someone does that, even 10, 15 years later, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they will destroy their charity. They will actually render it null and void. And then the example that Allah gives is that of a smooth rock on which there is soil. So imagine a rock. That rock is a person's book of deeds. And on that rock is some dry soil, dry dust. That dry soil and dust is the sadaqah. And then rain falls. That rain is man and other, boasting, hurting, using one's sadaqah as leverage. That rain will immediately wash away the sadaqah. Until فَتَرَكَهُ صَلْدًا, it leaves the rock bare. It will leave the book of deeds bare. And actually wash away all the reward and mention and memory of sadaqah. So this is a perfect example of how we should never treat our deeds or view our deeds in isolation. Our deeds are connected. We should never think that my salah is my salah. The salah has conditions. My sadaqah is sadaqah. The sadaqah has conditions for it to be accepted by Allah. And it must be sincere, it must be pure, and it must remain sincere and it must remain pure even for decades later, till the end of one's life. Otherwise it's very easy for it to be washed away. And let's move on to the next kitab. Let's do Abu Dawud. Imam Abu Dawud rahmatullahi alayhi passed away in 275 Hijri. So this is why I'm moving backwards. Remember, we are only going according to the tartib of the years of death, not the seniority of the ulama themselves, or the rank and standing of these kitabs. We'll be doing Ibn Majah next, and Ibn Majah passed away in 273 Hijri. But most ulama agree that Ibn Majah, the book, and his rank, the rank of the author and the book, are not superior to Imam Abu Dawood and his work, or even Imam Tirmidhi and his work. So again, find the beginning of Abu Dawood, Kitab al-Tahara. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبالسند المتصل مني إلى الإمام أبي داود رحمه الله قال: كتاب الطهارة، باب التخلي عند قضاء الحاجة. وبه قال حدثنا عبد الله بن مسلمة بن قعنب القعنبي قال حدثنا عبد العزيز يعني ابن محمد عن محمد يعني ابن عمرو عن أبي سلمة عن المغيرة بن شعبة رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان إذا ذهب المذهب أبعد. وبه قال حدثنا مسدد بن مسرهد قال حدثنا عيسى بن يونس قال حدثنا إسماعيل بن عبد الملك عن أبي الزبير عن جابر بن عبد الله رضي الله عنهما قال: إن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان إذا أراد البراز انطلق حتى لا يراه أحد. So again, this is to do with Tahara, and again it's another adab that when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would go out to answer the call of nature, he would go very far until he was not seen by anyone. This is a very basic adab of haya, of modesty, of bashfulness. Let's move on to the next kitab, Ibn Majah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is the Sunan of Ibn Majah. So find the beginning bab and hadith is bab ittiba'i sunnati Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. وبالسند المتصل مني إلى الإمام ابن ماجه رحمه الله قال: باب اتباع سنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. به قال حدثنا أبو بكر بن أبي شيبة قال حدثنا شريك عن الأعمش عن أبي صالح عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال: قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: ما أمرتكم به فخذوه وما نهيتكم عنه فانتهوا. Imam Ibn Majah begins his kitab with the topic of following and obeying the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. This is a very famous and very beautiful hadith. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam says: Whatever I instruct you to do, then take it, accept it. And whatever I forbid you from, then desist, refrain from it. The Quran is not the only source of guidance, learning, and learning in Islam, but the Quran is supplemented with the Hadith. And in fact, one cannot truly understand the Quran without the Hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And following the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam means in its entirety. Again, not selective. The next kitab is the Sahih of Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi. Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi passed away in 261 Hijri, 5 years after Imam Bukhari. And undoubtedly the two Sahihs, Imam Bukhari's Sahih and Imam Muslim's Sahih, are regarded as the most authentic books in Islam after the Holy Quran, at least by the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi has a very long muqaddamah, and I won't read the muqaddamah, but I'll actually read the first hadith, which is, subhanAllah, much later. It's a very long muqaddamah. So it's Kitab al-Iman. Find Kitab al-Iman. It's a very long hadith, but I'll quickly read. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وبالسند المتصل مني إلى الإمام مسلم رحمه الله قال الإمام أبو الحسين مسلم بن الحجاج رضي الله تعالى عنه بعون الله نبتدي وإياه نستكفي وما توفيقنا إلا بالله جل جلاله. قال حدثني أبو خيثمة زهير بن حرب قال حدثنا وكيع عن كهمس عن عبد الله بن بريدة عن يحيى بن يعمر وبه قال حدثنا عبيد الله بن معاذ العنبري وهذا حديثه. قال حدثنا أبي قال حدثنا كهمس عن ابن بريدة عن يحيى بن يعمر قال كان أول من قال في القدر بالبصرة معبد الجهني، فانطلقت أنا وحميد بن عبد الرحمن الحميري حاجين أو معتمرين، فقلنا لو لقينا أحدا من أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فسألناه عما يقول هؤلاء في القدر، فوفق لنا عبد الله بن عمر بن الخطاب داخلا المسجد، فاكتنفته أنا وصاحبي، أحدنا عن يمينه والآخر عن شماله، فظننت أن صاحبي سيكل الكلام إلي، فقلت يا أبا عبد الرحمن إنه قد ظهر قبلنا ناس يقرؤون القرآن ويتقفرون العلم، وذكر من شأنهم وأنهم يزعمون ألا قدر وأن الأمر أنف. قال إذا لقيت أولئك فأخبرهم أني بريء منهم وأنهم براء مني، والذي يحلف به عبد الله بن عمر لو أن لأحدهم مثل أحد ذهبا فأنفقه ما قبل الله منه حتى يؤمن بالقدر. ثم قال حدثني أبي عمر بن الخطاب قال بينما نحن عند رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ذات يوم اطلع علينا رجل شديد بياض الثياب شديد سواد الشعر لا يرى عليه أثر السفر ولا يعرفه منا أحد حتى جلس إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فأسند ركبتيه إلى ركبتيه ووضع كفيه على فخذيه وقال يا محمد أخبرني عن الإسلام. فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الإسلام أن تشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد رسول الله وتقيم الصلاة وتؤتي الزكاة وتصوم رمضان وتحج البيت إن استطعت إليه سبيلا. قال صدقت. قال فعجبنا له يسأله ويصدقه. قال فأخبرني عن الإيمان. قال أن تؤمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر وتؤمن بالقدر خيره وشره. قال صدقت. قال فأخبرني عن الإحسان. قال أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. قال فأخبرني عن الساعة. قال ما المسؤول عنها بأعلم من السائل. قال فأخبرني عن أماراتها. قال أن تلد الأمة ربتها وأن ترى الحفاة العراة العالة رعاء الشاء يتطاولون في البنيان. قال ثم انطلق فلبثت مليا ثم قال لي يا عمر أتدري من السائل؟ قلت الله ورسوله أعلم. قال فإنه جبريل أتاكم يعلمكم دينكم. This is a very famous hadith known as the Hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, and the first part of the hadith is actually to do with qadr, to believe in the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's a reference to a controversy that arose in the very early days of Islam, in which some people adopted a theological position of qadr not being part of religion and actually believing that there is no such thing as qadr. That's what the beginning of the hadith refers to. Rather, they believe that there is no such thing as fate and predestination, but that everything is spontaneous. And as for the second part of the hadith, which is known as the Hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, I've commented on that in detail. You can actually obtain the recording, it's available. So I've done quite a detailed commentary of the Hadith of Jibreel. Do refer to it and do listen to it. Let's do the Muwatta of Imam Malik rahimahullah برواية يحيى بن يحيى. We normally say the Muwatta of Imam Malik, and then the other Muwatta people say the Muwatta of Imam Muhammad. In effect, it's not incorrect to say it's the Muwatta of Imam Muhammad, but what it is, it's actually the Muwatta of Imam Malik ibn Anas, but with the narration of Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani. Imam Malik rahimahullah would teach hadith, and many students recorded hadith under him, and then they passed on these copies, these editions, these narrations to their own students. So, and some of them recorded fewer hadith, some of them recorded more hadith, and therefore there is a variation in the different narrations of the Muwatta. There are at least 27 narrations that we know of, possibly more, of the Muwatta of Imam Malik rahimahullah. But of these, the most famous two are, well, the most famous one is, when we say the Muwatta of Imam Malik, we normally refer to the Muwatta of Imam Malik according to the narration of Yahya ibn Yahya al-Andalusi. He was Andalusian. And so that's the most famous narration of Muwatta. When we say Muwatta, we refer to the narration of Muwatta by Imam Yahya ibn Yahya al-Andalusi. And this became prevalent and widespread and most famous in the western part of Islam. Western in the sense that the west of Baghdad. And the Muwatta of Imam Muhammad, west meaning in Sham, and then mainly in North Africa and Andalus, Muslim Spain. And the other narration, which is the most famous, alongside the narration of Yahya ibn Yahya, is the narration of Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, rahimahullah, who actually stayed in Medina for 3 years, studying under Imam Malik, and he memorized the whole of the Muwatta. And he also added some ahadith at the end of the abwab, in which he and his 2 grand teachers, Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahumullah, differed from Imam Malik. So Imam Muhammad would add whether this hadith and this view of Imam Malik is in conformity with the view and the practice of the people of Iraq, and mainly his great teachers, Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Abu Hanifa. So this is why there are many additions in the edition of Imam Muhammad's copy and manuscript of the Muwatta. But that became most famous in the East. So in the West, in the western part of Islam, of the Muslim realm, the Muwatta of Yahya ibn Yahya. And in the eastern part, the Muwatta of Imam Malik, according to the narration of Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, rahimahullah. Imam Muhammad passed away in 279 Hijri, 10 years after Imam Malik. Imam Abu Yusuf passed away in 181 Hijri, 2 years after Imam Malik, rahimahullah. So let's read the first hadith of the Muwatta of Imam Malik برواية يحيى بن يحيى. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبالسند المتصل مني إلى الإمام مالك رحمه الله قال: وقوت الصلاة. وبه قال حدثنا يحيى بن يحيى قال أخبرنا. This is the same Yahya ibn Yahya al-Andalusi that I'm referring to. قال أخبرنا مالك بن أنس عن ابن شهاب أن عمر بن عبد العزيز أخر الصلاة يوما فدخل عليه عروة بن الزبير فأخبره أن المغيرة بن شعبة رضي الله عنه أخر الصلاة يوما وهو بالكوفة، فدخل عليه أبو مسعود الأنصاري فقال: ما هذا يا مغيرة؟ أليس قد علمت أن جبريل نزل فصلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ثم صلى 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 رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ثم قال: بهذا أمرت. فقال عمر بن عبد العزيز: اعلم ما تحدث به يا عروة، أو إن جبريل هو الذي أقام لرسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وقت الصلاة. قال عروة: كذلك كان بشير بن أبي مسعود الأنصاري يحدث عن أبيه. قال عروة: ولقد حدثتني عائشة زوج النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يصلي العصر والشمس في حجرتها قبل أن تظهر. So that's the first hadith of the Muwatta of Imam Malik برواية يحيى ibn Yahya, and it's to do with awqat as-salah, as is very evident. Let's now do the Muwatta of Imam Malik برواية Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani rahimahullah. Now, as I said, there are variations, and so we have a different hadith. It's to do with wuqut as-salah, but it's a different narration to the first one, according to the narration of Yahya ibn Yahya. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبالسند المتصل مني إلى الإمام مالك رحمه الله قال: باب وقوت الصلاة. قال محمد بن الحسن: أخبرنا مالك بن أنس عن يزيد بن زياد مولى بني هاشم عن عبد الله بن رافع مولى أم سلمة رضي الله عنها زوج النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أنه سأله عن وقت الصلاة فقال أبو هريرة أنا أخبرك صل الظهر إذا كان ظلك مثلك، والعصر إذا كان ظلك مثليك، والمغرب إذا غربت الشمس، والعشاء ما بينك وبين ثلث الليل، فإن نمت إلى نصف الليل فلا نامت عيناك، وصل الصبح بغلس. قال محمد هذا قول أبي حنيفة رحمه الله في وقت العصر، وكان يرى الإسفار في الفجر. وأما في قولنا فإنا نقول إذا زاد الظل على المثل فصار مثل الشيء، وزيادة من حين زالت الشمس فقد دخل وقت العصر. وأما أبو حنيفة فإنه قال لا يدخل وقت العصر حتى يصير الظل مثلي. So that's the first hadith of the Muwatta of Imam Malik برواية Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani. We've done all of the other kitabs now, and now let's begin the first hadith of Sahih Al Bukhari. Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi died in 256 Hijri, and in fact he wasn't even born till after Imam Malik and Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad and the others. He was born in 194 Hijri, and he died at the age of, he died in 256. That would make him 62 in solar years. So if you've opened up the kitab, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وبالسند المتصل مني إلى الإمام البخاري رحمه الله قال: باب كيف كان بدء الوحي إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وقول الله عز وجل وقول الله عز وجل إنا أوحينا إليك كما أوحينا إلى نوح والنبيين من بعده. وبه قال حدثنا الحميدي قال حدثنا سفيان قال حدثنا يحيى بن سعيد الأنصاري قال أخبرني محمد بن إبراهيم التيمي أنه سمع علقمة بن وقاص الليثي يقول: سمعت عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله عنه على المنبر يقول: سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول: إنما الأعمال بالنيات وإنما لامرئ ما نوى، فمن كانت هجرته إلى دنيا يصيبها أو إلى امرأة ينكحها فهجرته إلى ما هاجر إليه. So this is the famous first hadith of Sahih Al Bukhari. Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi's kitab is not very complex. It's quite simple. It's just a collection of ahadith. Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi has very few, if any, non-marfu' ahadith in his kitab. From beginning till end, it's just a clear collection of ahadith in clusters relating to different topics. It's not a complex structure at all. He doesn't go into any kalam of fiqh. In fact, the abwab that we find in Sahih Muslim are not even the abwab of Imam Muslim rahimahullah himself, in the sense that he did not place abwab in his kitab. The ulama agree that the abwab we find in Sahih Muslim, these are the abwab, the additions and the insertions of ulama later, commentators, including Imam Nawawi rahmatullahi alayhi, as well as later editors, ulama and commentators. So Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi never inserted abwab in his kitab. And there's even a discussion as to whether he even inserted the names of the kutub. So are the names of the kitabs in Sahih Muslim from Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi or not? Even that's a discussion. The ulama agree that the abwab were not inserted by Imam Muslim. So all I'm trying to say is that the structure of Imam Muslim's kitab is very simple. Ultimately, it's just a clear collection of hadith without any other discussion. Hadith after hadith after hadith. And there are repetitions in the Sahih of Imam Muslim. But the repetitions come immediately after the first hadith. So you have the first main hadith, which is the asl. And then immediately after the first hadith, Imam Muslim repeats the same hadith with different asanid. And those repetitions are known as the mutaba'at. But that's it. There's no discussion. And then you won't find those repetitions elsewhere in the Sahih of Imam Muslim. So it's a very simple kitab, and yet he has an extremely long muqaddamah. In contrast, Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi's kitab is the most complex book in all of the collections of hadith. The most complex. Every one of his abwab has a tarjamah. So the bab is the structure of Imam Bukhari's kitab is, it's a collection of kutub. It's a compendium. So you have many kutub, approximately 100, approximately. And each kitab then has chapters, abwab. And each of these chapters then has a subtitle and an extension of the chapter title, known as the tarjamah. So his chapter titles, as well as their extended subtitles, are full of information, aqwal, athar, ta'liqat, i.e. mu'allaq ahadith, questions and issues of fiqh and theology. So, and then you've an ayat of the Quran, obviously, and then beneath that you will find the ahadith. So it's a very complicated, complex kitab, without doubt. It really is. And yet Imam Bukhari has no introduction to his kitab. Despite it being so complex, there's no introduction. No introduction whatsoever. This is how he begins his kitab. Babun kayfa kana badul wahi ila Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The ulama all endeavour to connect and link the hadith with the tarjamatul bab. Even Hazrat Shaykh Zakaria rahimahullah has a magnificent work called Al-Abwab wa Tarajim, in which he has tried to, well, he has written a commentary focusing only on the book and chapter titles and their extended subtitles and subheadings. And he's tried quite exhaustively to link the hadith of each bab with the tarjamah, with the bab, with the chapter heading and title. It's a very complex work in itself. But Imam Bukhari has no introduction. And then, as I said, ulama have always tried to ensure that the hadith in each bab is relevant to the book and chapter and title heading. So here we have the first hadith, and apparently it has nothing to do with the kitab or the chapter title. So, what's the first bab? Babun kayfa kana badul wahi ila Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa qawlullahi azza wa jal. You can even say wa qawlillahi azza wa jal ma'atufan ala bab. So babu qawlillahi azza wa jal. إنا أوحينا إليك كما أوحينا إلى نوح والنبيين من بعده إلى آخر الآية. Again, this is just an ishara to the full ayah. that verily we have revealed to you, just as we revealed to Nuh and the prophets after him. And then you have the first hadith. And the first hadith has got nothing to do with wahy, or the beginning of wahy. That all begins with the second hadith. So why has Imam Bukhari inserted this hadith? Well, it's a reminder of the sincerity of intention. This is the most famous hadith for sincerity of intention and purity of motive. And so this first hadith is a reminder to the readers, to the students, to the teachers, to the ulama, to everyone, to ensure that their niyyah is sincere before learning, before studying this kitab and teaching it. This in itself is a muqaddamah of his kitab. There's no other muqaddamah, this is a muqaddamah. So we should ensure that we are sincere in our study of Sahih Al Bukhari, in our study of all the books of Hadith, in our study of ilm in general. And ilm doesn't mean necessarily a formal study in a course where you study for 6-7 years and then graduate. That's ilm, without doubt, that's ilm. But ilm is anything we learn. And that means that if we attend a single talk in a masjid, that is learning. Even in that single talk, we have to ensure that we are sincere. In a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, "Man talaba ilman liyujariya bihi al-ulama, aw liyumariya bihi as-sufaha, aw liyasrifa bihi wujuh an-nas ilayhi, adkhalahu Allah an-nar." That whoever seeks any knowledge, to compete with the scholars, to run alongside them, or to confound the ignorant and the foolish, and to argue with them, or to turn people's gaze and attention towards himself. So these are 3 insincere intentions the Prophet ﷺ mentions in this one single hadith. That whoever seeks knowledge, one of 3 things. So what are the 3? لِيُجَارِيَ بِهِ الْعُلَمَاء, so that he may compete with and run alongside with ulama. The idea is that someone sees an alim, mashallah, he's respected, he's influential, he's sitting on the mimbar, he's got people's attention. I want to be like him. And so let me learn in order to become like him. Let me learn so that I can speak like him. Let me learn so that I can lecture like him. Let me learn so that I can lead like him. So he now wants to run alongside the ulama, compete with them and rival them. That's an insincere intention. Any knowledge we gain, whether it's a single mas'ala, whether it's attending one speech, whether it's attending one gathering, whether it's attending a 5-year course, it doesn't matter. If our intention is insincere, what will happen? Prophet ﷺ tells us at the end of the hadith, أَدْخَلَهُ اللَّهُ النَّارِ, Allah will fling him into the fire. So that's the first insincere intention. To compete with, to rival with the ulama, to rival the ulama. Number 2, أَوْ لِيُمَارِيَ بِهِ السُّفَهَاءِ, or so that he can confound the foolish, i.e. face the foolish with his knowledge. So the idea is that ignorant people and foolish people, they will be astounded and confounded and impressed by his knowledge. If that's his purpose, to impress people, to be able to debate with and argue with them, to overwhelm them and to confound them. That's insincere. And number 3, أو ليصرف به وجوه الناس إليه. If anyone seeks knowledge so that he can turn people's attention towards himself, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will fling him into the fire. It's not worth it to, as I mentioned in my speech last week at the Bukhari Khatm in Leicester, that why would anyone want fame? It's a very funny thing. People strive to become famous. And when they do become famous, they fight to retain their privacy. And I even quoted a famous celebrity. It's a female singer. Famous celebrity. She's been in the industry for decades. She's in halls of fame. She's still alive and she's in halls of fame. Widely, fabulously rich, widely admired in the music industry. Hailed as a star and an icon of music. And in one interview she was asked, "What do you say about fame?" And she said about fame that I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy's dog. That's what she thinks about fame. I wouldn't wish fame on my worst enemy's dog. So, why would... And I was speaking about fame. Imam Bukhari himself is a perfect example. Who today could hope to aspire to achieve Imam Bukhari's position? Hope to be like him or aspire to his fame, name and influence and position? He was a genius. People would make dua that we could only just see his face. One alim says that I visited Egypt, and in Egypt I met 30 ulama. Those 30 great ulama told me that our one hope in life, our one wish in life, is to see the face of Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari. He was so famous. He didn't have a single hair on his face. He was a young teenager. And he would teach hadith to large gatherings of ulama. When he would visit cities, people would go out and camp on the roads leading up to the city for miles. So up to 3-4 miles there would be tents, and people would be camped outside the city for days waiting for the arrival of Imam Bukhari. When he would arrive, they would shower him with flowers, petals, but more importantly, they would shower him with silver coins, darahim, and gold sovereigns, dananir. Once he was a very good marksman, a brilliant archer. So he was shooting arrows, and he was on land that belonged to a very famous and powerful governor who ruled over a whole region. So there was a wooden bridge, and they were shooting near there. And when he shot an arrow, it missed the mark and it hit and embedded itself into a wooden post of the bridge. Slightly damaged it. So Imam Bukhari stopped shooting the arrows and he sent a messenger to the governor of that area, of that region. And he said to him that, tell the governor that this is what's happened. I've damaged the wooden post of your bridge, tell me what I need to do to make this halal. Very early on at the beginning of the session, I mentioned to make halal what they've made haram between them, that Allah will not forgive someone until that person has made halal what they've made haram between them. So the phrase may not make much sense in English, but in Arabic, and this is where I've taken it from, the Arabs would say, اجعلني في حل, which means that if someone wronged another, then they've now created a haram between them. So they would say, اجعلني في حل منك, or اجعلني في حل من أمرك, that now make me halal in our relationship. So, or place me in a halal part of our relationship, or a halal part of your affair. It can't really be translated into English, which means that what I've made haram, make halal for me. I've wronged you, so tell me, how can I remove that wrong and make halal what I've made haram? So Imam Bukhari sent word to that governor, saying, look, I've damaged your wooden post in archery. How can I make amends? How can I rectify this? How can I repair this damage? What do I need to do? What compensation do I have to pay? So the governor sent a message back to him, saying to the messenger, tell Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari that what's one wooden post and what's the bridge? All my lands and estates are at your disposal. All my lands and estates and my wealth are at your disposal. So that was the esteem that people held him in. And yet what happened with the fame of Bukhari? Because of misunderstandings, because of rumours, because of lies, because of people indulging in that which didn't concern them, because of people dabbling into something which they did not understand. Why do I say this? Because it all began. He entered the city of Naysabur, and people gathered, thousands, to listen to Hadith. People should have been listening to him for Hadith. Imam Bukhari had an opinion. It was a theological opinion. It was to do with the created or uncreated nature of the speech of Allah and one's recitation of the speech of Allah. It's a very complicated, complex, hair-splitting theological discussion. It's actually a philosophical discussion. And even ulama are baffled by it. How would non-ulama understand this? Many of you will have heard of this topic, Al-Qur'anu kalamullahi ghayru makhluq, that the Qur'an is the speech of Allah, uncreated. So what's the origin of this whole discussion? Did a few people just wake up one day and say, rather naively and stupidly, oh, the Qur'an is created? And then the ulama rose up and said, no, the Qur'an is not created. It's uncreated. That's not the origin of this discussion. The origin of the whole discussion of the created or uncreated nature of Allah lies in philosophy, lies in deep, complex, hair-splitting discussions about the sifat of Allah, His attributes, and whether those attributes are pre-existing and eternal, or coexisting with Allah, or non-existent, that came into being later. If these attributes of Allah, and this whole discussion about the attributes of Allah, that are these attributes of Allah inseparable to Allah or not? And are they the same as the essence of Allah, or are they distinct from the essence of Allah? If they are distinct from the essence of Allah, are they forever attached, or inseparable, or separable? And if they are separable, then did they coexist with Allah in pre-existence, or were they did they come into being later, i.e. were they hadith? If they were hadith, they came into existence later, at a late stage, and they weren't forever pre-existing alongside Allah, then these attributes, these sifat, when they came into existence later, hadith, did they come into existence themselves, or were they muhdith, i.e. brought into existence? And if they were brought into existence, that means they were created by Allah. And since kalam is kalam is one of the sifat of Allah, the speech of Allah is one of the attributes of Allah, and since the Quran is part of the kalam and the speech of Allah, is the Quran something that came into existence later, or did it always pre-exist? And if it came into existence later, did it come into existence itself spontaneously, or was it brought into existence? And if it was brought into existence by Allah, then that means it was created. So this is just skimming the surface of this theological and philosophical discussion. Now, how even the ulama were baffled by this. And the people discussing this, who actually brought up these ideas originally, were Mu'tazili philosophers. And the Mu'tazila were not stupid. One of the leading Mu'tazili scholars, they were highly intelligent individuals. Even Orientalists have mentioned that the Mu'tazilis were some of the most brilliant minds of Muslim history. And in fact, one of the Mu'tazili scholars, he actually wrote a book about atoms. And he had a discussion, he wrote a book on something which he called the leaping atom, the tafra. And do you know what that is? It's actually a discussion of quantum physics. So some of these Mu'tazili scholars were discussing quantum physics then. And they were the same ones who were also ultimately discussing Al-Qur'an Kalamullahi makhluqun am ghayru makhluq. So the Mu'tazilis weren't stupid. They were highly intelligent philosophers. So imagine, this is a discussion of whether the Qur'an is the kalam of Allah or not. And as part of that discussion, an extension of that discussion was that, okay, the Qur'an is the uncreated speech of Allah. But then how far should that be taken? When we recite the Qur'an, is our recitation, our tilawah of the Qur'an, is that created? i.e. something that's come into existence now? Or is that also pre-existing and eternal, as part of the speech and the kalam of Allah? So imagine, that was a discussion. So I've gone into this lengthy explanation. Why? Because the ulama should have been listening, everyone should have come to listen to him narrate hadith. Imam Muhammad ibn Yahya al-Dhuhli rahimahullah, the greatest scholar of Naysabur at the time, he actually told people that Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari is coming here. Do not ask him about theological issues. If you want to go to listen to hadith, listen to hadith. Do not question him about theological issues. Because if he says something which we are, or some of us are in disagreement with, then this will cause huge problems. He actually said, شَمَتَ بِنَا كُلَّ رَافِضِيٌّ وَنَاصِبٍ. So, the people don't listen. So Imam Bukhari rahimahullah was relating hadith in this huge gathering, thousands and thousands of people, including ulama. And the whole discussion is about hadith. And what happens? And this is the nature of human behavior. If you have a gathering of 1,000 people, and one scholar speaks for 3 hours in that gathering of 1,000 people, and for 3 hours he says nothing wrong, he speaks beautifully about Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, words of wisdom. And after 3 hours, one person, one out of a congregation of 1,000, stands up and says one stupid thing. So one idiot stands up and says one stupid thing. That's it. People will forever remember not the audience of 1,000, not the speech of 3 hours, or the blessed nature of that beautiful 3-hour gathering. People will forever remember the one idiot and what he had to say. That's human nature. So we shouldn't do that either. I remember just that one thing. But then again, Imam Bukhari rahimahullah related hadith. Someone stood up. And he had nothing to do with the hadith. He had nothing to do with what Imam Bukhari had been saying or relating. And he said to him, "What do you say? Lafzi bil Qur'ani makhluqun am la?" Tell me, is my recitation of the Qur'an created or uncreated? What happened? Imam Bukhari ignored him. He didn't want to answer. The man persisted. Tell me, Lafzi bil Qur'ani makhluqun am la, is my recitation of the Qur'an created or uncreated? Imam Bukhari ignored him. He persisted 3 times. Then Imam Bukhari replied in a very cautious manner, Al-Qur'anu kalamullahi ghayru makhluq. وَإِنَّ أَلْفَاظَنَا مِنْ أَعْمَالِنَا وَأَعْمَالُنَا مَخْلُوقَةٌ. That the Qur'an is the uncreated speech of Allah, and our recitation, our words, are of our deeds, and our deeds are created. He said that. There was an uproar immediately. Instantly people began saying, he says, Lafzi bil Qur'ani makhluq, that my recitation of the Qur'an is created. And others began saying, no, he didn't say that. And people began arguing until the organizers and the responsible people had to clear the hall and remove everyone. Imam Bukhari ultimately fled the city of Naysabur, fearing for his life. Over what? Over one person creating fitna by asking something that he shouldn't have been asking, by igniting a debate about something that they shouldn't have been discussing, and that they didn't even fully understand. And when Imam Bukhari said something, the whole audience actually split into groups. One part saying he said this, another part saying no, he said that. So they couldn't even agree on what he said, even though it had just happened. This teaches us many lessons. It's very easy for someone's words to be misunderstood, to be misconstrued, to be misquoted. Imagine, this is someone of the caliber of Imam Bukhari, and he said something, instantly people divided into different groups. 1. Number 2, they shouldn't have been discussing that anyway. We should refrain from discussing matters that do not concern us. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says in a hadith, "Min husni islam al-mar'i tarkuhu ma la ya'ni." Part of the beauty of a man's religion is that he shuns that which does not concern him. Number 1. Nor should we be debating or indulging or dabbling into things that we don't fully understand. You will all, in fact, there are many issues in which there is a valid opinion. There's no need to create fitna. There are so many opinions about so many matters. The moon issue. The moon sighting issue. Allahu Akbar. We have such fitna in our communities. We have such abuse and vitriol directed at the ulama and at proponents of one view against the other. Messages go around attacking and abusing and falsely accusing ulama over a religious issue such as womb sighting. And I'm not saying this now. Almost 20 years ago, 20, when I was commenting on Sahih Al Bukhari in Tajreed Al-Sarih, I gave a very detailed explanation in one entire session of the commentary of Bukhari. That look, all of the ulama try to act on the hadith, Summu li ru'yatihi wa aftiru li ru'yatihi. That fast upon the sighting of the crescent and break your fast upon the sighting of the crescent. But their approach is different. Both parties aim and wish to follow the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Ultimately, they disagree on their approach and on their methodology and on their conclusions. And in a way, both approaches are correct. In a way. And this is why I've never, ever, my personal position is, wherever I am, I go with the local masjid. If the local masjid, my local masjid, or the majority of the masajid in my area do Ramadan fast on one day, I join. If they do fast on another day, I join. If they do Eid on one day, I join. And I do it ala basira, knowing the hadith, knowing the fiqh, knowing the verdicts of the ulama throughout Islamic history regarding that issue, and fully understanding timings, degrees, calculations, astronomical predictions, and the probability or even the possibility of citing them. So there are valid opinions on both sides. We shouldn't be dealing in these issues and creating fitna out of them. And this is what happens. What happened with Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, despite his, I was talking about fame and sincerity, despite his fame, Imam Bukhari ended up travelling from city to city, shunned, driven out, persecuted, until he ended up in Khartang, a village at a short distance from Samarkand. And there he passed away in tragic circumstances. In fact, he was so persecuted by the people, he prayed for death. Imam Bukhari prayed for death, and Allah accepted his dua. And before the end of it, he made dua to Allah during Ramadan, "O Allah, call me back unto yourself, because the earth, despite its vastness, has become narrow and restricted for me." Allah accepted his dua in Ramadan. On the night of Eid, he passed away. So I was speaking about fame and sincerity. Who could hope to become as famous, as influential as Imam Bukhari? In ilm, in deen, in scholarship, in religious standing. And yet that's what happened to him. He died persecuted. He was persecuted to such an extent that he prayed for death. So that's why I said fame is a very funny thing. It doesn't mean anything. The same people who elevate you one day will drop you the next. The same people who kiss your feet one day will go for your neck the next. The same people who one day regard you as Shaykh al-Islam and a saint and a wali and a scholar, as they did with Imam Bukhari, the very next day they will hound you and persecute you. And then what happened with Imam Bukhari? When he did pass away, lonely, in solitude, in a village, people then came to his grave and began weeping at his grave. That's what happens. So up, down, up. So they elevated him. They then flung him from the top and hounded him. Then they went and stood at his grave weeping. That's fame for you. So why would anyone want that? It doesn't pay. And therefore, we should be sincere in our acquisition of knowledge, in our learning. We shouldn't be doing it for fame, to attract attention. We should only be doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a very timely reminder. I'll end with this. It's time for Maghrib Salah.